Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about sexual and asexual production in plants and how they reproduce. So plants can either be sexually reproductive, or they can do asexual. So plant propagation, what you need to know, and we kind of touched on this before, is really just increasing the number of plants. So making new plants is basically what propagation is. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. You could do it through seeds, which would be sexual. You could do it through cuttings, which would be like an asexual. So that's like a succulent where you take off a piece of it and you stick it in the ground and it's going to grow and make a new plant. Okay. So those are really popular ones. So to understand propagation, you need to understand the anatomy of a plant and how they produce the seeds. So you learned already that not all plants are going to produce seeds. Some that don't produce seeds, they do it asexually, and they don't have these parts. So this is just for plants that reproduce sexually and they have male and female parts, or only male or only female. They can have both parts, or they can have only one of these parts. So this is going to be this like circle right here that you see. Let me see. So this area right here, this is the female part, okay? So this circle right here, this is where most of the reproduction is going to happen. So this is the ovule and the ovary. So these are, if you know anything about reproduction and females, animals or humans, you should know ovary and ovule, those terms, okay? This is where the embryo or the seed is going to develop in the ovary. Something kind of unique. So fruit trees, like an apple tree or pear tree, something like that. The pear, the fruit itself, is the ovary. So when you're eating fruit, it's kind of funny to think about. You're eating plant ovary, right? So that's what that is, the fruit, because inside the fruit is the ovule or the seeds, right? You get apple seeds. Okay, so that's plant has female parts, right? So they do it sexually. So hopefully that kind of puts it in perspective of what I'm talking about. Other parts of the female are this long thing right here. And not every plant is going to be as easy to identify as this, but some of them, like especially flowering plants, you could go out and find some, and I encourage you to try to find these parts. So the stigma, this is this part right here that kind of gathers some pollen. The pistil is what we call this female part. Think of a girl, oh, that girl's a pistil. That's a good way to remember the female part's named pistil. Style is this long stem-like thing. Then you have the pollen tube also up here. It collects the pollen. So the pollen is distributed into the stigma right here. It goes all the way down the stigma, the style, and it hits the ovary and to the ovule, and then it develops into an ovule. Okay, that's the female part. Female takes the semen. All right, next we have the male part, which is over here, the stamen. Stamen is the male part. It's not that complex. You have the filament, which is basically like a stem, and the anther, which are these yellow things on top. Why do you think it's yellow? Because on top, you have what? It's hard to draw. Pollen, right? So pollen is basically the male sex organ. So pollen is produced here on the anther. So if it's a bee's going to come by, they're going to eat or get the nectar out of here, and they're going to get some pollen on their feet. They're going to land on another flower. They may land on this stigma right here, right? Then the pollen is going to go down here into the ovary, connect with the ovule, and there you have a seed. All right? So that's basically, really in layman's terms, sexual reproduction for plants. You've got some other parts on here. Petal. I mean, obviously, petals, they're not just, they're because they have purpose. They're there to protect the inner parts of the plant, and they're also there to look pretty and attract pollinators. That's why flowers have scents. That's why flowers are colorful. It's to attract these pollinators. Because insects, especially bees, they have more sensitivity more than we do for their eyes and their senses. So those colors are extremely bright to them. So that's why they're drawn to the pretty flowers. You've got the sepal, which are where your leaves can come out. Basically, these are like a hard leaf that's also protection around that ovary. You have the receptacle, which is basically where the stem is going to meet the flower. The pedicel, which is a hard part of the stem before it goes down into the stem. Okay? So they're saying what I had just said. And there's two ways. You can do it by insect or animals. It's not just insects. Like a dog can pollinate a plant also. Or wind. So a dandelion, you've probably done this before where you take the dandelion and you're going to blow on it, and all of these are seeds. Okay, so you are helping pollinate when you're doing that. So pollination can be done by wind, or it can be done by birds or bees. And you may notice those, like this one. See, it's not dandelions. They're not very pretty, right? They don't have bright color or a scent. They kind of stink, actually. Well, that's because they don't need it. They rely on the wind. Flowers like roses, they're very beautiful. They smell really great. They rely on those qualities to attract bees, butterflies, other insects to pollinate for them. All right, let's talk about asexual. So not all plants are going to have seeds, or reproduce doing sexual reproduction. Plants use a variety of different asexual strategies. So there's natural forms, and scientists and gardeners, they can actually use asexual reproduction to make plants propagate when they wouldn't naturally. So a lot of plants that don't produce flowers are going to reproduce this way, like ferns and mosses. They produce spores or gametes, which if you look on the back of a fern, like you see these little dots, those are spores. Okay, those are used for reproduction. Spores don't rely on male or female parts to create a new plant. So here's kind of a life cycle or a reproduction cycle that's going to happen. So it's going to require 2 generations to create a new plant from a fern. Okay, so it goes from meiosis, the spore, sporangium, then it actually just develops and it's got the sperm and the egg and it fertilizes and it creates a new little sporite, which then turns into the fern that we know. So here's the steps outlined. The fern produces very fine spores on the underside of the leaf called fronds. You'll see those little dots if you look on the back of a fern. They open, distribute the spores. Then the spore germinates and it grows, forming a prothallus. And that's the gametophyte stage of the fern. And that produces gametes or male and female reproductive cells. So that makes it then have male and female parts. From the fertilized gametes, a new genetically identical plant grows. Some other ways that they can asexually reproduce are runners. So runners are long, slender stems that grow along the ground. So strawberries can do this, like you see these long stems right there. These slender stems produce roots, adventitious roots. Those are the ones that spread. Roots that grow from any part of the plant, and they grow into the ground. So they just start making new plants. So they go spider plants, a lot of ivies. They're going to grow this way. Another one is rhizomes or underground stems, or another type. The rhizome spreads, new nodes are going to form, which then create new plants. And these are going to make identical plants to the parent plant. Irises are going to grow this way. Here's an apple, like produce suckers. So some plants produce suckers. These are sprouts from the roots, which produce a new plant. So along the roots, there may be little buds or sprouts that are going to open up. So commercially grown bananas are propagated using suckers. You might have noticed that bananas don't have seeds, even though they're fruit, right? Adventitious plants can reproduce from any part of the plant, even the leaves. And then apomixis, a common in some type of grasses and citrus fruits, is the asexual reproduction of seeds. The seeds are dispersed by birds, winds, or animals, but the plant's a clone of the parent. Asexual reproduction is more common in harsher habits, where there's not insects or not other things that they can rely on to reproduce sexually. There's a significantly less benefit or advantage to genetic variation, so that's why they need to be similar so they can survive in these conditions. Examples of marginal environments that produce a higher than normal number of asexual plants are Arctic and subarctic regions. So think about like Antarctica, your extreme conditions. This is where asexual reproduction is going to come in handy.